Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Spooney's Scrapbook. This is the second season of this great thing that we provide for you. And of course, the man who makes it all happen. He's been coaching Ansonia before I was even alive, and he continues to do so today. And tell you what, we really need football right now because if you're a fan of either New York team, the Mets or Yankees, we don't have much to look forward to in baseball, so we really need football. My guest today, of course, is John Sponheimer. And, Coach, thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, Michael. And I feel the exact same way you do about baseball. I'm a lifelong Yankee fan for, 60-something years, and it's been a struggle, so I'm ecstatic that football has arrived on the scene.
Yeah, most definitely. You know, Coach, I'm very good friends with a guy I know you know well, Doc Mamora, and he, of course, went to Notre Dame of West Haven. And he was telling me a funny story, and we don't have to get too much into it, but he told me the infamous walkie-talkie story back in the early 60s between Shelton and Notre Dame. So always enjoy those great stories, and I'm sure you remember that game well.
Mike, I was a freshman at Notre Dame at the time, and Notre Dame had just beaten Fairfield Prep by about 4 touchdowns 2 weeks before that to go number 1 in the state, and they were playing Shelton at Quigley Stadium. And I happened to be standing very close to Notre Dame, where Notre Dame was sending the players into the game. And unbeknownst to Notre Dame, Shelton had a walkie-talkie system, which was on the same frequency as Notre Dame. And for up until 4 minutes to go in the game, when Shelton was ahead 7-0, Notre Dame had no idea that all their players were being picked off by Shelton. And Notre Dame figured it out, shut down their own walkie-talkies, went in and scored to make it 7-6, and didn't make the 2-point conversion. And Shelton went on to record the victory. I've got to know many of the Shelton players from that era, especially Barry Conway and Vinny Lorella, who was one of my best friends in my lifetime. He passed away a number of years ago, but I must have heard about that game 500 times at a minimum over the years from the Shelton players of that era. But it knocked Notre Dame out of being number 1, and it meant a lot to the Shelton graduates forever.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. It was just funny, all those years I had never heard that story, but listening to Doc tell it was pretty funny. But Coach, so let's get into the 1990 season. Coach, it's funny too. I remember, I think I went to the Shelton Ansonia game of that year, and my sister saw someone she knew, and he was bragging about Ansonia, and she jokingly said, "Oh, you guys are awful." And he goes, "Well, this year we are." And it always makes me laugh because I don't know how fans could, decide that after one game that the team is going to be awful. But it just makes me laugh because as long as I've been around, I've never seen what you call an awful Ansonia team. So let me ask you, I know for the players, sometimes it's a no-win situation. Is it tough for you guys as coaches when you hear fans make those remarks? Because it's like no matter how good you guys do each year, it's forgotten the next season.
It really has no effect on how we coach, Mike, and how we prepare for games. We're happy the fans are so interested, but our coaching and preparation is based on what we believe in our team and what we hope we're capable of doing. But in 1990, we were coming off a number 1 team in the state. The 89 team had a lot of great seniors, and we had, I believe, we had to come up with a whole new offensive line. We had to get a new quarterback. We did have Kevin Sharkey and Dennis Tinney back, who were 2 very, very outstanding football players in the backfield. But we had lost an outstanding group of seniors, especially in the offensive and defensive lines from the year before. But
right.
But we expected to win, and that was our concept.
Exactly. And I believe that season, did you open up with Holy Cross that first game?
Yes, we always opened up with Holy Cross and Shelton, and then went Kennedy, Sacred Heart, Torrington, Derby on.
Right. And at that point, Coach, Holy Cross was starting to become a better program. They had played you guys very tough. But the thing about that 90 team, what I always saw about them is they were the type of team, maybe they didn't blow you away and, blow everybody out. But that was a team that knew how to win. And people forget that sometimes because that team really grinded out a lot of wins that year.
We did. And Naugatuck was thought to be the best team in the NVL early on. They had a tremendous senior class, and they were really jumping the teams and beating up teams all by substantial margins until we played them. And matter of fact, one of the other teams, Sacred Heart, lost by 5 touchdowns to Naugatuck, lost by 2 touchdowns to us, and went on to win the state championship that year also. So Naugatuck was an outstanding football team that year.
Right. So, Coach, talk to me about the incoming freshmen that year. Did you feel that group of freshmen that you coached that year could be really exciting when they got to be seniors, because they would have a great year, which we'll get to at some point. But that was a very good freshman class. But it was also a freshman class that lost a couple players to different schools. I think Keith Carlack went to Seymour his freshman year. I think there was a kid by the name of Jamie Hine who was very good, and he left for another school. So did you have a good feel for that freshman team that they could be special?
It was a decent freshman team, but I believe it was close to a 500 freshman team, and we usually sought to achieve a better finish than that. But the ones who came through, Jamie Leahy was a great linebacker for us. Billy Lassou. They played in the 90s. They were the leaders of the 93 team as seniors, which went 9-1 and lost to Naugatuck. Yeah. But it was primarily the younger kids who picked up the program as it went on from that year.
Right. So, Coach, let's start with the Shelton game, because they always play Ansonia tough. But again, Ansonia always finds ways to beat them. But one thing that bothered me, and it's been many years now, so you get over it, but I really was disappointed when they did away with the Shelton Ansonia game. It was the second game of the year. It kind of got that First Valley game going to start the season. It gave you a little appetizer between Derby and Ansonia, between Seymour and Shelton. So that was disappointing to me. Were you disappointed when they did away with that game?
We love playing Shelton. We admire their talent, their coaching. In 88, they won the Double L state title. In 91, they won the Housatonic League, beat a real good Cheshire team up, beat them really bad. And we beat them that year. And they lost to Notre Dame, Notre Dame went 10-11-1. And they lost to Notre Dame, I believe, 7-6, or a very close score, and fumbled from the 8-yard line with a minute to go in the game. Going in. So Shelton had some outstanding teams, but starting in after the 94, the 74 season, I believe from 75 through 93, when we played Shelton, in those 18 games, we went 17-1. So that's one of the great records in the Ansonia history, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, and I always think of that first year Jack coached when you guys took the chance and went for 2, because you guys could have settled for a tie. I think it would have ended in a tie because Coach Riggio decided not to play the overtime. So, I mean, that was a gutsy move by Jack that year, going for 2 like that.
It absolutely was.
Yeah. So, Coach, let's talk about Rich Lester. He would be the quarterback that year. And what I saw in him is, especially his senior year, but you could just see little by little he was getting better. He had to really learn, the offense, and he got better as each game went on. So how would you assess his first year as a quarterback for you guys?
Rich was a very talented quarterback, had a very strong arm. We were still a running team primarily with Kevin Sharkey and Dennis Tenney, but Rich did a real nice job, and he got better as the season went along. He had a tough game against Derby, but Derby was an outstanding football team, as you know, that year. But Rich very well against Naugatuck on Thanksgiving Day when they were undefeated. And when we beat them, it knocked Naugatuck out of the state playoffs, and Rich played outstanding that day.
Yeah, I just felt like each game he got better and better. He really got more comfortable in the position and felt like it was his team. I think in the beginning he was trying to establish himself. And, you're going to make mistakes early on when you're playing a position at the varsity level for the first time. But he really did a great job. Coach, another team, you brought him up recently, but you guys had some great games with them, and especially in 1990 as well as Sacred Heart. And that ended up being like a real good rivalry. I would say from like 87 to about like 94, there were always tough games. Just talk about that year playing them and the, rivalry you had with them a little bit.
In those 10 or 15 years, Sacred Heart had as good a group of running backs as of any. We used to play Notre Dame. We played Shelton. In fact, on the freshman level, we played every NVL school. We played Derby. No one had as good a group of running backs over a 10-year period on the freshman level as Sacred Heart did. They had outstanding running backs who played in the Waterbury Pop Warner leagues, and went on. A number of them went on to play. Curtis Collins was one, the one that comes to mind right away. But they had a flock of them who were excellent running backs, and created a lot of problems for any NVL team when they played them. As I said, they got beat by two pretty good NVL teams and still went on to win a state championship in 1990.
Yeah, definitely. Two players, Coach, from that 90 team that I felt really stepped up for you guys and had a great season was number one, Carl Barrett, and then also Robbie Clark. I thought Robbie Clark was as good as any defensive player that year. He really stepped up in a big way. Just talk about those two a little bit.
Carl Barrett was a wide receiver. He caught a number of touchdown passes, caught a big one against Naugatuck. I think he might have caught one against Derby, was called back because of a penalty. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But he was a very clutch receiver. And when it came to Robbie Clark playing defense, he was only a junior then. He hit and accelerated to the ball as quickly and as tough as any linebacker we've ever had in Ansonia in all the years I've been there. He was even better the next year. But he was very good as a junior. As a sophomore, when we were number one, he started as a safety. But then the next 2 years, he played linebacker. He was an all-state linebacker his senior year. And he was the acceleration and the ability to hit were two of his characteristics, were as good as anybody we've ever coached.
Yeah, he was really fun to watch. And I mean, he was, that, throwback player who could do everything the coach asked of him. And he always stepped up in big games. Even as a sophomore, he had a big game against Derby. So he always embraced the challenge. Speaking of which, Coach, the Derby game now, that would be the one loss that Ansonia would have for that year. And what was crazy was, I'm sure you guys knew Derby would throw at times, but I don't think any of you guys could have envisioned that you would lose that game on 3 touchdowns by a kid by the name of Brian Marcuscio, when Derby was really known a lot for their running game with Palmieri and Ann Roman. Just talk about that game a little bit, because what I remember about that game too is there were a ton of penalties in that game with both teams.
You're right, and it did go back and forth. First of all, Derby was an outstanding football team.
Yeah.
Joey Martin was as good a two-way quarterback as I've ever seen, to be honest with you. He was a better safety than the quarterback. I mean, he was a great quarterback, but with the ability to intercept passes and fill the alley on run plays, he was tremendous. And obviously, Palmieri and Romo were outstanding running backs, but they were also great defensive players for Derby. And but those 3 players, and it's a shame, one if not more of them were not registered all-staters, because they were exceptional football players. And but Derby was solid with Hyder and Chevarella beside that, and the whole team. And and one thing which I was happy to see for Derby's sake, for everybody's sake, but the Houstonic League had finally agreed to play overtime games when games were tied. And our league did it in the NVL all the time. And I always thought teams, and now they do it, because of the playoffs, it's mandatory you play. You can't have ties anymore.
Right.
And I believe Derby ended up, I saw one. It was a great high school game. Derby and North Haven ended up in a tie, and Derby beat them 2 weeks before we were going to play them on a Saturday night. And I think Derby went to overtime with Lyman Hall later in the year and came to win. And I think, it shows you what a great team they were to still persevere and win, even in trying overtime situations. But Derby was an exceptional team. And you're right. I mean, obviously, we really thought we had to take away the run with Palmieri and Aaron Roman, and we did a decent job on that. But Brian Marcuccio had replaced a suspended player, I believe, and came in and made 3 great catches, mainly post patterns, and Derby hung on and to win by, I think it was 19-15. Kevin Sharkey made a great run with about 2 minutes to go in the game on a pass he caught in the flat, and it took us down to about the 10-yard line. But Derby stiffened up. We were not able to complete a pass we thought we might be successful at, and then we had one picked off in the end zone. But give Derby all the credit. They hung in there. I know they were. I don't know. I know the penalties were up and down. We had 2 touchdowns called back, but that's the nature of the game. Derby outplayed us and won. And again, we had a chance to get in the playoffs with them. And at 9-1, we didn't get in. And it is as we've talked about it before, Derby didn't want to meet us again. The same way when we were undefeated and they were 9-1 in '87, we were happy that we didn't have to play them again. Playing Derby when you're the victor in that game, playing that team once in a year is good enough for anybody. And when you've lost in that game, you're dying to get another shot at the team, but we just didn't. And that's the nature. That's the beast of the game. But give Derby all the credit, and we actually contributed to their being number one because Naugatuck is ranked ahead of them. And had Naugatuck beaten us on Thanksgiving Day and gone on to win the state championship, they would have finished ahead of Derby. So we beat Naugatuck, and Derby was a great team, and they won in the playoff. And they also caught another break when Danbury was beaten by Greenwich on Saturday night. I said a break only for the poll's sake. I thought Derby was the best team in the state, and so we contributed somewhat to their success at the end. But we were very pleased to beat Naugatuck, which was one of the great 2 or 3 Naugatuck wins in the Ansonia series that year. I mean, that year of all the years I've coached.
Yeah, it definitely was. One thing that it was very moving to see after that game, and there's a great photo of it that still gets thrown around a lot, is when Coach DeCenzo went up to Kevin Sharkey after that game. And Coach DeCenzo really respected the player that Kevin was, the talent that he was. And for him to seek him out and go up to him, because, it's a tough loss. Kevin's a senior, that's a tough game. But I remember Kevin saying to me that, that not that it made him feel a lot better, but it made him feel good that a coach on an opposing team would go up to him like that and, appreciate his talent. So I always enjoyed that. And that's what I always felt like with the Derby coaches and the Ansonia coaches. They always respected one another and the players on each side of the, sidelines.
Well, we had a close relationship with the Derby coaching staff. I mean, Charlie DeCenzo was a grammar school classmate of mine at St. Mary's in Derby. I remember when he moved there, I think about 4th grade. And he's been a friend. He was a classy kid he's grown up with. He's a classy individual. He's a great classy coach, just a great guy. And that can be said for so many of the Derby members of the Derby coaching staff. And, we respected him. We wanted to beat them the same way they wanted to beat us. And Charlie played softball with Jack and Dell. But when you're playing them, you want to beat them as bad as you can. Not as bad as score-wise, but to win the game. And they felt the same way. And there were some outstanding games to be involved in as a coach. And we were fortunate to have won our share.
Right. So late in the season, Coach, I remember they had talked about Wolcott might be a tough game for you guys. I think you ended up beating them like 18-6, something like that. So they played you decent, but really the game everybody was looking at was the Naugatuck game. And correct me if I'm wrong, Coach, is Jack wanted to always win Thanksgiving more than anything else because that was his favorite holiday. And he really took the Thanksgiving game personally. So he really wanted to win Thanksgiving all the time.
He absolutely did. And it was a special game to him. And, he passed away on Thanksgiving Day or within an hour of it.
Yeah. It was Thanksgiving. Yeah.
And we went to visit him we were scouting and came to visit him to pay our last words to him, like about 11 o'clock on a Thanksgiving Eve one time. It was very special what Thanksgiving meant to Jack, and there were tears in our eyes. But for him to have the record he had on Thanksgiving Day against Naugatuck, which was 17-2,
Yeah.
against great Naugatuck teams. Nobody in the history of high school coaching football or in the Valley or whatever. I mean, as great as Bill McAllister was as a coach, or as great as Tom Brockett's got a shot, but he still has to win, I think, 3 or 4 more just to tie Jack on Thanksgiving Day. To do that as an Ansonia coach, Boots Jarvis never came close to that record on Thanksgiving Day as Jack had. That meant an awful lot. And my last words to Jack was, Hunter, you owned Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you really did. And great game that you guys played that day. Kevin had a phenomenal game, and it was nice because the kids were able to come away with a championship. And I know that Ansonia is measured a lot with state championships, and they're almost compared a lot to the Yankees. You don't win the World Series, it's a disappointing season. You don't win a state title, it's disappointing. But those kids beat a team that was ranked, I think, number 2 in the state at the time, and they knocked them out of the playoffs, and they win the MVL championship. So, I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, you can't complain about the season except, that they didn't get to the playoffs. But they did everything you guys could ask out of them as coaches.
They did a great job. I mean, to come from where they were, especially in rebuilding the whole offensive line from tackle to tackle, which was all seniors the year before. We were very pleased. That, I mean, there was still some we were reticent a little bit, and we were together after Thanksgiving, and the scores were coming in, and we knew we wouldn't get into the playoffs. I mean, it was still a great win over Naugatuck. I mean, other than the '94 crowd, there were probably about 10,000 people at the game in Ansonia. It was one of the great crowds, and Naugatuck really thought that they were going to go on and win the state title. They had really been whacking teams the whole year, and it made it as good as could possibly be without having the ability to go and play in a state championship game.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. I mean, it was a great win for Ansonia, and I still could see that image of Denise, seeking out Jack, and she gives him a big hug, and she always knew how much he loved Thanksgiving. So, I mean, that was a great moment to see on the field as well.
It absolutely was.
Yeah. So, Coach, let's talk about when the '90 season ended, because I had heard different rumors. I had heard, number one, that Dell had thought about stepping down because his son had graduated. And I think Dell was also going through a little of a health scare at the time. I think he had maybe a mild heart attack. And then I also heard that Jack was thinking of stepping aside. I mean, were both those instances true? I mean, we're both thinking about stepping away.
I don't know how strong it became. There's always a thought at the time. I mean, I don't really think Jack was going to step away. He'd only been the head coach since '87.
Yeah.
In 4 years, and Dell had been, Dell was still assistant coach. Duncan did a great job for us because Duncan was a tight end. He was a freshman quarterback. He became a tight end as a sophomore and a junior, and we knew that to win, have a chance to win, that Duncan had to become an offensive tackle. He still played defensive end. Or no, I'm sorry, he played defensive tackle for us, but he had to make that change, and it was a real sacrifice for him. And he's a coach now, and he knows what has to be done. And he did a great job for us as an offensive tackle. And had he not switched there was no way we would have had the success that we had. So that was a real contribution on his behalf. And now he's head coach at the Andrew Ward. And I don't know if because Duncan was graduating, if Dell was really thinking of stepping down. He did coach, and he coached so successfully for us through the '98 season. So fortunately, he didn't leave right away, and we had a pretty good run even after when he stayed anyway.
Right. Another thing they did in the offseason, the Derby and Ansonia coaches kind of got together, and they came up with a picnic to start the season, to have both Ansonia and Derby have a picnic together to kind of, sometimes Derby and Ansonia, they could kind of meet up at McDonald's or Dutch's, and they wanted to keep like a nice truce with the players before the game, the Ansonia Derby game. So they did a picnic for a couple of years. I thought that was a great idea. It kind of, got the players to know one another. Did you like that they did that?
I think that was a nice idea. It didn't last very long, but it was a good idea.
Yeah, it definitely was. So let's talk about the 91 season, Coach. And I talk about that freshman team because that 91 freshman team, I remember seeing them. I was a freshman at Derby, and I mean, that was a special group. I mean, you knew there were going to be big things for that team. I mean, they had such talented players. They had Ronald Tate, Peter Reynolds, Joe Jakowski. I think even Damon Perry played on that team at one point. And I mean, the Sisto brothers. I mean, they just had Antonio Tate. It was a talented group. Could you see right away from that first week of practice that this could be a special group someday?
Yes, we did. We knew that with Ronald Tate there and just the overall talent on that team. We had some excellent linemen. We really thought that we'd be a pretty good team in the future. And that team went 9-1. They lost to an outstanding West Haven team, one of the best West Haven teams I've ever seen. But other than that, we beat everybody, and it was a class that went on to went undefeated in the regular season in '82, lost just to Naugatuck in 82 and 92, lost to Naugatuck in '93, went 9-1. Then his seniors went 11-0 and won the state title. So they were an exceptional class, and his seniors that team played in probably the most famous high school Naugatuck Ansonia game ever, the overtime game on Thanksgiving Day where we were victorious.
Right. And Coach, let me ask you, it's very important for you as a freshman coach to kind of put these kids in the right positions, see where they're going to play as time goes on. And I'm sure like on that freshman team, you're looking at kids and you're saying, okay, well, maybe right now he's a tight end, but I could see him being a tackle someday, or this kid's a guard right now, but maybe he'll be a center. I mean, how important is it for you to make sure you're putting these kids at the right positions because you're trying to prepare them for the varsity level? So how important is that?
Well, that's important. Most important thing is get them to play. Get them to play and understand the fundamentals of football, that you have to play when it's hot, when it's cold, when you're banged up a little bit. The things that don't go as easy as they might have gone in your grammar school days, and you have to realize you have to become disciplined as a player, and you have to give yourself a lot to the program. And usually, we've been pretty successful in finding the right position for you as a freshman. Sometimes people change as we send them to the varsity, but the positions that they played in as a freshman usually have worked out pretty well.
Right. Now, Coach, you obviously play a big part in the varsity program, and you did back then as well. But you were always the freshman coach too. I mean, did you just always want to continue to be the freshman coach? It seemed like you really enjoyed working with the freshmen all the time.
Well, there are two aspects of it. Certainly, I definitely enjoy working with the freshmen all the time, being the first one to really meet them as they come onto into the football program. I think that's important. When I say the first one, being part of the freshman's coaching staff, that's the first group to really meet them. And then also with my job as a lawyer, there's sometimes I can't be there every day, and if you miss a freshman practice, as long as your co-coach is with you and can still run the freshman practice, that's fine. But if you're a varsity coach, it's important that you be there, perhaps more than that being a freshman coach. So it's always worked out. I've had a great involvement with the varsity ever since I began, and so it couldn't have been any better for me.
Right. And I believe at that time you had a coach by the name of Steve Pepler helping you as well as Kevin Rowley, correct?
Steve Pepler was a very good helper, a very good assistant for many years. But Kevin Rowley's been there the longest. I couldn't have existed without him. He's done a tremendous job, and I'm very fortunate we're still together.
Right. So let's talk about the 91 season, Coach. And let me tell you, I'm sure you're going to remember this when I bring it up. But boy, that Seymour game, I never saw kids go down with cramps like Ansonia was that day. I mean, what do you think happened? I mean, do you think it was just the situation where it was hot that day? But I mean, you guys pulled away. You won 14-7, I believe. But I remember that game. I always called that game the cramp game because there were a lot of kids going down that day with cramps.
Well, first of all, that was the year of the extra game in a sense because we played. Seymour was not in the NBL then. and they had a very good running back named Billy Brooks, who was a fullback, and the game went back and forth. I said there were a lot of cramps, there were a lot of, it was the first game of the year. It was really an intense game, and we were fortunate that we were able to hang in there and contain him for the most part, and we went on to win by a touchdown. Again, we were putting together a new offensive line. Everybody's putting together something new in the season, but we had Robbie, who was a great leader for us, and he really kept things together for us, and we hung in there, and we were able to be victorious.
Yeah, and that was a great game. And I also think too that with the 11th game, usually kids have that extra week they could work on things, and they had to kind of play early on. But it was a great win nonetheless. Then you go into the Shelton game, man. I believe at the half, correct me if I'm wrong, it might have been tied. I think Shelton went ahead early in the third quarter, but then you guys really stepped it up. And I believe you won that game by about 2 touchdowns. And you had just alluded to it earlier. That was a great Shelton team. They had Eason, who was unbelievable. Danny Field was the quarterback. So, I mean, they had a tremendous group that year, Shelton.
Shelton had some great linemen also. And we ran a tight end screen for a touchdown late in the game, which kid Freddie Pettit made a great play for us. And if you be honest, I don't think we've ever looked as mismatched playing Shelton as we did early on in that game. They were massive. They had some great players. That was one of our if I were to pick out among the top 10 regular season wins in my coaching years at Ansonia, that win over Shelton fits right in there with any of them. That was and when they went on, I saw them play Cheshire at the end of the year. They just beat Cheshire up very badly. And at the end of I told the week before before they played us, they played Notre Dame 11-1, and they could have very easily beaten Notre Dame. It was a great win for us at that time over Shelton.
Yeah, it definitely was. And then, Coach, I mean, you guys really looked like you were in sync. You guys really looked like you were gelling well. And then, I mean, that Derby game came, and the story I was always told, I'm trying to remember what Ansonia player told me. It'll come to me soon. But the motivation for that year, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is when Derby had won the state title the year before, they had Dan Shea did a nice video package for that team. It was a great video tribute to them. But I think the Ansonia players had a little chip on their shoulder because they showed 2 different segments of Derby beating Ansonia twice. I remember the kid was telling me that was the extra motivation. And boy, you guys really came out there. And what I remember about that game too is I think Jack Hunt had a busy week because I do believe his son got married the night before that game. So there was a lot of stuff going into that game. But boy, you guys really from the start left no doubt about that game.
We played very well in that game. There was plenty of motivation. It was the Ansonia Derby. There was the loss of the year before. Obviously, the tape was played a number of times, which we had the tape and was played a number of times. But the team was motivated to play no matter what reason. And I don't know if we've ever played as physically a game against Derby where we were just so much more physically able to make plays than they were at the time. That was unusual because they usually had every bit of the physicality as we did, but we sort of were a little more physical that day, and it worked out very well for us.
Yeah, and we talked about Lester early on. What a game he had that day. He had a tremendous game. I believe he was player of the game. I mean, he really stepped up, and you could just tell by that point he had just had so much confidence as the quarterback for you guys.
Absolutely did.
Yeah, definitely. So, Coach, one of the things I never understood, and to this day it still kind of confuses me, is how you beat a team early in the season and then you got to play them again. You had to do it with Torrington in '87, and then you had to do it with Holy Cross. And one of the funniest images I ever saw, I don't know if you saw it yourself, but Naugatuck had to beat Holy Cross more than 2 points in order to play for the title game against Ansonia. And they only beat Holy Cross, I think, 26-24. So Naugatuck wins the game. And I'll never forget watching on Cable 10, Holy Cross celebrating because they realized they're going to play for the title game. I never saw a team ever celebrate a loss. And honestly, are did you are you a fan of how the NVL did that back then, where if you
No,
you
it was
know
ludicrous.
yeah
But what happened, Mike? It was we we weren't there that night because we were playing at the same time. But Naugatuck, like you say, had to beat Holy Cross by more than 2 points,
yeah
and Naugatuck Naugatuck was Holy Cross scored to come within two, and Naugatuck took timeout, and Peters met with the team and said, "Look, the only way we can be in the NVL playoff is to have this game go into overtime. So do we allow them to score the 2 points to tie it, and then we try and beat them in overtime?" And the kids said yes. But what they did is they didn't disguise it well. They shouldn't even bother to disguise it. They should just like ran the other way and let them score, because what they did, they lined up with them, and Holy Cross tried to throw the ball and threw it incomplete.
yeah
And Naugatuck won the game, but they wanted to go into overtime to try and play for the MVL title against us. And they didn't. I talked to Peters about it. He said we should have just ran off the field and let them score, and then we could have played for the overtime game. But so that's what happened, though.
yeah, and it was really weird. And again, I never saw a team celebrate a loss, which
I
I
know,
don't I
right?
don't I don't think the coach would have been too happy about that. But coach, I remember going to that game that night, and that you never make excuses. Both teams have to deal with it. But I'll tell you, the weather was just a big factor, and it really hurt you guys because you guys were fumbling the snap a lot. I mean, do you can't like look back on it and say, well, maybe this would have happened if. But I mean, do you think that rain really affected that outcome that night?
I would say that we had Jason Tinney, who was a real scat back, and he could really dance well. He played even better on artificial turf. But it was played at Municipal Stadium, and it was inundated with rain, and half of the field was the baseball field, and we literally just couldn't do anything. That we lost 6-0. We had beaten them previously early on in the year. Um, I would have liked to play them on better grounds, but again, I don't make the rules, and it hurt not winning that game, but so be it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough loss. It really didn't, other than it took away an undefeated season, it really didn't hurt Ansonia. They didn't lose any points for that game. But what I really, you know, thought about was how well Ansonia responded, because they came back in that Naugatuck game, and I think you guys beat Naugatuck by 3 or 4 touchdowns. It was a blowout. So that you guys really came back that Thanksgiving week and really played Ansonia football like we know Ansonia can do.
Played very well in that game, as a matter of fact. You're right.
Yeah. So you go into the New London game, and I'll be honest, coach, I mean, sometimes you just got to tip your cap to the other team. And I mean, New London just had a talented group that year. Those Fletcher brothers were unbelievable. I mean, let me ask you, going into that game, did you look at it and say, you know what, they're a little better than us right now?
I don't know if we said they're a little better. I thought we'd have to play exceptionally well to win the game. Besides the Fletcher brothers, they had another kid named Troy McKelvin, who was about a 6'4" receiver
Yeah.
standing, and they had lost two bitter games to us in '87 and '88, so they had everything to shoot for themselves, and they ended up number one in the register poll that year. So we lost to a pretty good team.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I mean, but that group of kids, I know they didn't go undefeated, but they did go 11-2. They made the playoffs again, which they always do. And I mean, I thought it was a successful season. I mean, you win 11 games. How could you really like complain too much?
You're right, Mike. That's true.
Yeah. So, coach, next time around, we're going to get into 92, and we're going to, 92 to like 96. What a time it was for Ansonia football, but we'll get into that. So, just tell the fans real quick before we go. How did you like today's scrimmage? I mean, you don't have to tell us too much, but how would you assess today's scrimmage?
I assess it. We played very well in the beginning. We played poorly in the second portion of the scrimmage, and we realized we have to improve in a number of areas. It was the first time, but it's the first time for everybody. So we have Notre Dame on Saturday. So it's sort of how we played last year. We didn't play very well in the first scrimmage. We played very well against Notre Dame, and then exceptionally well against Shelton at the end. In the last, we played a half a scrimmage against Shelton, but played exceptionally well against them. So we hope to take the same steps that we took last year and to move on.
Well, Coach, I give you a lot of credit. I mean, you worked this morning, then you coached, now you're doing this, so you deserve to get some sleep. But thank you for giving me a few minutes, as you always do, and I look forward to continuing doing this.
My pleasure, Michael.
Thank you, Coach. And of course, folks, that's the one and only John Sponheimer for Spooney Scrapbook. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mike. Bye now.